Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, life coach Myrna Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Cynthia Star, author of Starving, Binging, Purging, the true story of how I recovered from an eating disorder, and you can too. And today, Cynthia and I are going to be talking on the topic, how to recover from eating disorders. So, if this manifests with you at all, if this is some kind of, you know that you're eating when you shouldn't, you
Yeah.
know that you're binging after you eat a lot, then I encourage you to stick around to the end so you can, hear Cynthia's story and how she recovered. So welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Myrna. I'm happy to be here.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to have this conversation. All
Me too.
right, so let me give you guys a brief synopsis of Cynthia's book. Driven by the pursuit of perfection and the desire to be truly loved and accepted, Cynthia battled an eating disorder for 13 long years. Starving, Binging, Purging is her raw, authentic story, told firsthand. A story not just of suffering, but of resilience, victory, and hope against all odds. In this book, Cynthia openly explores the complex issues of anorexia, bulimia, purging, food addiction, and shares the immediate, intimate details of her journey to reclaim her life. She also includes 21 crucial recovery lessons to help those suffering from eating disorders heal and win their own battles. Yeah. When I hear of eating disorders, my mind goes directly to Princess Diana, who had bulimia and who it was one of the faces of eating disorder.
Yeah.
So, as we dive in, Cynthia, in your book, you shared that your brothers mistreated you and that your dad abandoned your family. Do you think that your childhood trauma is where your eating disorder started? Because it usually does.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It was the perfect setup for an eating disorder, quite frankly. Along with those things, my mother set up um, food battles, I guess, at a very young age with me. Not intentionally. I mean, there was no intention on her part. She was doing what she was raised, and during that time you ate what was on your plate and you didn't leave the table until everything was gone and things were set in front of me that I didn't like. And at a fairly young age I was a little obstinate, strong-headed, if you can imagine, and it became her will against mine. So that was in the very, very early years. And so at that point, without realizing it, I um, was taught how food can be used as a control weapon.
Mm.
That's a big part of it. And then with the abandon issues and my brothers mistreating me, bullying me, and um, I think it was all absolutely a setup for what happened in later years.
Okay, so take me through that so it can connect with some of the listeners. So, I grew up where you had to eat all the food on your plate, but because we were poor, and even my grandmother would say, "You're starving kids, you better
Yeah.
eat food."
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
I mean, let's start with that. Let's unpack that one first. So, what did your mom, why did she want to make you eat? Was that she was giving you vegetables and you didn't want to eat it, or what was the deal there?
Well, I remember eggs, not liking eggs. I talk about that in the book. That's how the book starts, about how I was sitting at the table swinging my legs and, with the eggs in front of me. And I could sit there for hours because I didn't like eggs. And I couldn't move off the chair and go play until I ate my eggs. And so, that's where the battle became, because I don't like eggs, or I don't like liver and onions. I don't like spinach. So therefore, I'm not going to eat them. And so that's how the battle between my mother's will and mine, and in my little mind, a young mind, I knew that I could outlast her. That, okay,
Wow.
I'm not going to eat that food. I don't like it and I'm not going to eat it. So that's what happened. And yes, it was, you have to eat everything on your plate, obviously. That's what she fixed. That's what's in front of you. Or You
You
just
know,
sit there, and that's what I remember. And the sad part about it was, of course, my mother had no intention of setting me up for an eating disorder or even meaning me any harm. Um, she just did what she had been taught to do and probably what was done with her, quite frankly. Um,
yeah,
so yeah,
yeah.
that's
Well,
it.
well, that's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it's really interesting that, parents can damage their kids with the best intentions because I grew up with the same philosophy and my daughter would eat her broccoli or whatever. And yeah, you let them, they normally do outlast you though, because they can sit there for hours and would touch it. And what can you do? After
Yeah,
a while, you should just get up and go to your bed or go to your room or something. But
yeah.
yeah, but what I was thinking though is that you talked, your book is about starving, binging, and purging. So at any point in time, did you eat that egg and then decide to go throw it up? Or did that happen later on?
That happened later on. At
Okay.
that point, it was just laying the foundation for using food as a control weapon,
Okay.
unbeknownst to me, unbeknownst to my mother. But as I wrote the book and as I uncovered things as I went along and, really put everything in one place when I wrote it, I was able to look back and go, wow, that like I was the poster child
Mhm.
for an eating disorder. Everything that
Mhm.
could have set me up for one did. And
Yes.
an
Mhm.
eating disorder, for those that don't have one or don't struggle with it, in my opinion, the main thing underlying, if you were to take back all the layers, all the things under it, the baseline starts, in my opinion, with its control. It's a
Yeah.
way that maybe around me I felt out of control, especially as I got older and chaos ensued in our lives. That was the one thing in my life that I learned that I could control and nobody else could make me do it or not do it. And
Mhm.
so control is a huge, huge element in an eating disorder.
Wow. I want to unpack that later on, but now I'm just going to set the foundation. So, all right. So your mom wouldn't let you get up from the table until you ate your eggs. And I would probably be a mother that does that too, because eggs are good for you. So I can understand where she was coming from.
Right.
But how did your brothers mistreating you and the abandonment issue? Is that where you started to use, because that's where I'm thinking it's going, that you started to use food as an emotional
Yeah.
comfort thing? Is that what happened there?
Yes. So when I was young, and I go into some of the memories in the book of sitting on my dad's lap at the breakfast table and him feeding me bites of his soggy cereal. And, I kind of set the table for what that was. And then when he abandoned us and left us, and my love of my dad and my entire life trying to get his approval and his love and feeling like unless I was perfect, then if I was perfect, maybe he would love me the way that I needed him to love me or wanted him to love me. And a good portion of my life was spent trying to do that very thing. And then my brother, since my dad abandoned us and my mom was a single mom back in the 60s with three children, no child support, no help, no Medicaid, nothing. She did it all by herself with three children. And consequently, we were left alone quite a bit, and there was not a male figure during a good portion of it to stop my brothers. We were left alone, so we were unsupervised because my brother was 4 years older than me, and the other one was 2 years old. So we're kids left to themselves. I mean, kids do mean things. And if they're not stopped, particularly, if you're stronger than someone and bigger than someone, and they were mean to me and they got away with it. And that caused me to kind of go into myself and to put up really big walls around myself. And so that nobody could get in because that was my safe space was in me, and whatever you do to me or say to me, you can't hurt me while I'm inside of myself. And that I also think is another big thing under eating disorders is that mentally, the longer you go with it, the more inside of yourself you become. And that's where you live, and that's where you dwell, and that's where the sickness or the mental, I call it a mental wound. I don't really like to call it mental illness. Um, it can become that, and mine did. And then you dwell in that space, and it's isolating, and you live in secrecy, and you live in lies, and you live so deep inside of yourself that you you lose touch with reality, and you that's what the binging becomes, is an
Mhm,
escape from reality, an escape from, for me it did.
mhm.
So yeah, that's
Okay. All right. So I'm getting that. All right. So it sounds like your eating disorder um, started later on in life because of these childhood wounds. Your
yes,
mom trying to use food as a control, your brothers, your mom, that kind of thing. And what you're saying is because you went inside, um, sooner or later, then you probably tried to feed that inner child. That's where I'm going with it. Okay, so when did this cycle of starving yourself, then binging, and then eating, I mean, then throwing it up, which is what purging is, when did that manifest itself in your life?
sure. The binging started first, and that was
Okay.
when I was probably 12, 13 years old, um, at a fairly young age. And so, like I said, I had gone into myself, and then the abuse from my brothers, the mistreatment, I guess, continued through parts of that. And so it was my escape. And then my mother was going through her own difficulties, her own challenges. She was a victim of her own life, raising an abusive father. So she had three kids to raise, and nobody to help with the burden. My uncle did come with us for a while, but so again, being left alone quite a bit, and then not she binged. She was obese during a certain period of her time life. She struggled with her own weight most of her life, and so I developed very unhealthy eating habits. We, like you, we were poor. We were poor. My mother made sure we always had food on the table, but we didn't always have the healthiest food. A lot of fried foods, a lot of potatoes and different things. And so, as I kind of wrote about in the book, and as I looked back, I realized that as I was going into puberty, I didn't like my body, and I didn't like the changes, and I didn't know how to deal with them. I was a very active child. I was outside. I rode my horse. We lived on a farm. And so being outside, being with animals, that was where my comfort zone. And so as my body started to change, as I've stripped away all the layers and gotten really real with myself, I didn't want to change. I wanted to stay in my childhood body. And
Mhm.
so as I had unhealthy eating habits and I began to binge, and then it became a solace, like you said, eating my feelings, stuffing them inside. And so then the binging became a problem because it's painful, it's uncomfortable. And then the guilt and the shame wash over you because you've eaten all this, and then there you are. And so the purging came next. So that came as a solution.
Now, how did you learn to purge? Because I don't even think I can do it. I've seen people stick their hand down their throat and throw up. Who
Yeah,
taught you
never.
to do that? Or that's just something you learn
Oh,
automatically?
I tell that too, but my brother that was 2 years older than me was in wrestling, and they have to make weight, and
Oh.
he was always kind of a little bit of a pudgy kid and carried a little extra weight. And so then he would exercise and wear sweatsuits and spit into a cup, and then he taught himself to throw up. So
Mm.
as I was beginning to gain weight in puberty and binging and needed to find a way in my mind to
Mm.
escape that, and so it came as a solution to the binging because I was getting pudgy, I was getting chubby, and I didn't like myself. And so now I'm going into puberty, and I'm getting fat, chubby, whatever you want to call it. I have a really small body, so extra weight shows up on me really easy, and it doesn't, and so I asked him to show me how he did it. And I tell in the book that I will never tell the secret. I will never share it with anybody because I never want anybody to do it. But it's not sticking your finger down your throat. There's just a method that I learned that I wasn't very good at in the beginning, like anything, but I became much, much better at it. And so that's how the purging started until you purge all the time. You binge because of all of the things going on inside that you're either not dealing with or you don't know how to deal with. And then the purging started, and then the laxatives started, and it's a vicious cycle like any addiction.
Mhm.
And you don't start it out as an, thinking, well, this is, you just start out trying to find escape or a coping mechanism to what's going on in your life. And since so many things had happened to me, I had no idea how to handle them. And then you put puberty on top of it, and then you put weight gain on top of it, and you put, all of those things on top of it. And it was the perfect storm.
All right. So when did we get to the starving?
The starving came about in high school. I was a junior in high school, and I had grown up in the same small town for most of my school years. And then as a junior in high school, my mom lost the farm. Her and my uncle had gone into business, and that blew up and it fell apart. And so she moved me to another town, much larger town, and um, I was chubby, and the boys made fun of me. And I remember walking down the hallway and them laughing at my butt, my fat butt, quite frankly. And
Now,
that,
hang on. Was that all in your head? Because I know people that are anorexic, they look in the mirror and they see that they're fat, but they're really not. Because
right,
if you're purging, how did you get fat?
right. Well, so because I developed all of them, and they became interchangeable at some point. So the binging started first, then the purging. And most bulimics that binge and purge are of normal to even slightly overweight individuals. So I would put myself into that category at that time.
Okay.
And because I'm very small boned, I'm short, I have a small frame, 10 extra pounds on me. I probably had 15 at that time.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I was pudgy and they saw it and they made fun of me. And so
Okay. All right.
I was in a new school and trying to be accepted and all of these things going on. And so that's when I started going without eating. That's
Mhm.
when I wanted to lose weight. And so, the way I did it was as unhealthy as the way that I had binged and purged. And so I just didn't eat. And so I would not eat until I got home from school, have a little snack in the afternoon, maybe just dinner, and that would be pretty much what I would eat the whole day
Okay.
until I lost, 10, 15 pounds. And I knew that I looked pretty good, but for me, I mean, finally I felt like I looked pretty good. But yeah, I've always felt like, I weigh too much or I need to lose weight. I mean, I still battle with it. I still deal with it. Just because I don't binge and purge or starve myself, it's a battle that I don't call it a battle anymore because it's not.
Okay.
I'm aware of it, I'm cognizant of it, and then I've learned how to talk myself through it and to focus on things outside of myself so
Okay.
that I don't go into that dark space again. So that's how and at that time when I was in high school, I call it, it was like having a tool belt. and I had one more tool in my belt, in my arsenal that I could pull out and use anytime, starvation,
Mm,
because most
mm,
people couldn't overcome being that hungry. And I'm like, okay, I know
mm.
how to do it, and I can do it if I want to do it. And there it is.
Okay.
Now I binge, purge, and starve if I want to.
Okay. That's actually pretty good. I mean, I think that it takes a lot of mental fortitude to start results. Like you said, a lot of people can't do it. But all
Most
right,
people
so that
can't.
brings up, yeah,
Not fun.
yeah, I know. But that brings up the mental part of this. So um, you talk about anorexia and bulimia in your book and in the bio of the book. Did you ever, were you ever diagnosed with any of that?
Oh, absolutely.
You were?
Yes, all of it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So for a listening audience, how does anorexia look? So we've just heard your story. You felt that you were 10 pounds overweight, which is not a lot. That does not make you fat. 50 pounds or 100 pounds makes you fat. But 10 pounds doesn't really make you fat. But when you looked in the mirror, you saw that you were fat and the boys were laughing at you and you had a big butt.
Absolutely.
Um, so how did that develop into anorexia? I mean, walk us through that. And
Okay.
what's the difference between anorexia and bulimia?
Absolutely. Well, that's good since I, experienced all of them and interchangeably sometimes went through, different stages at different times. The same driving thing. So bulimia is when you purge, either,
Okay.
you binge essentially most of the time, and then that becomes an addiction. For me, it did. And then I learned to purge both through vomiting, self-vomiting, and or use of laxatives. Abuse of laxatives would be a better word for it. And then the starving. So the binging or the bulimia is doing that, binging and purging,
Okay.
whatever
Right.
methods that you use. So the anorexia is, and now I think they call it bulimorexia for bulimia because they've made the tie between anorexia and bulimia.
Okay.
Although
Right.
not everybody that's a bulimic is anorexic or vice versa. But the anorexics, what happens is you starve yourself. You quit eating or you eat very little and you exercise and you no matter how much weight you lose, no matter how thin you are, it's never thin enough and you become obsessed with it and then until you can no longer tell reality. And
Mhm.
um I'm sure that there were different times in my life when I was pretty thin and people would say something and I'd be like, no. Or they'd call me skinny and I'd be like, I'm not skinny. Like I hated to be called skinny. Actually,
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
small.
Okay.
I'm muscular.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Muscular. Yeah, yeah, I'm muscular. I'm small. But there were times when, but the truth is that as an anorexic, I loved my bones sticking out. I loved it.
Mhm.
That's the truth. Hip bone sticking out. I talk about how my emaciated calves felt in my hands and I loved it and it felt powerful and it felt like I ruled the world. That I don't
Wow.
know how to tell you. It's
Wow.
scary. It's really scary to say that, but it is the truth of what when my mind got to that place, the anorexia, and then it was control. Because if you can control your food, you can control anything. You can control yourself. And when your life feels out of control or other people control you, then it's the one thing in, that mind, that sick
Love
mind,
it.
frankly, that tells you this is my way of controlling myself or others, because then it becomes control kind of with others, quite frankly, as especially anorexia as it develops and progresses.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I love learning about this stuff. I mean, again, I've only had a high level overview of it by seeing, people showing pictures of anorexia who look in the mirror and say they're fat. I knew of Princess Diana that would eat. I've heard people talking about they eat a yogurt and then they run around the park to lose that, to lose the pounds from the yogurt. So I've heard about that, but yeah, this is the first time I've actually had a conversation with someone that's actually experienced that. So, all right. So your problem started when you're a teenager in middle school and high school. How long did it take you to fix it? And how did you start? What made you recognize that you have a problem that started in order to fix it? I know that you have come up with 21 recovery lessons and it's in your book. But before we get to how you got to recovery, give us the middle part. What made you realize that, watching your bones stick out is not good?
Right. Well, I knew I had a problem with the binging. I mean, people that binge are very well aware that it's a problem, and it becomes a
Okay.
bigger problem. It becomes where uncontrollable, and it becomes an addiction, whether they ever purge or not. But when you binge,
Mhm.
it's like somebody else takes over your body, and
Mm.
you it's all, at least for me, it was like stepping outside of my body, watching myself do the binging and being unable to stop it
Right.
until, like, either you were so incredibly full, or then you go and purge, and then you go back and binge. And then it
Wow.
became a cycle where nothing stayed in my stomach. So either I
Mm.
didn't eat, or then I binged, and then I purged until when I reached college. By the time I reached college, pretty much nothing stayed in my stomach. I had no
Wow.
idea. Like I threw up everything all the time
Wow. Even when you didn't want to. Wow.
because I was
Yeah,
so
because your stomach has got that reflex now because your things are going the opposite way. Right. Okay.
it was just such an addiction. It was
Mm.
such an addiction that then you become so uncomfortable with food sitting in your stomach that even a cup of coffee, I would go throw up a cup of coffee.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's and I would, yeah, all times of day. I would get up at night sometimes and binge and purge. It was completely, so there was no doubt in my mind that there was a
A
problem.
problem.
You know,
Right.
then
Okay.
later in life, at towards the end, I pulled out that you go in between eating, not eating. I would say the bulk of my 13 years was spent binging and purging, intermittently with uh, the starving. And then at one point, I made up my mind later that I was just going to starve myself. I
Mm.
consciously I made the decision, because food becomes your enemy. It's
Mm.
no longer your friend. It
Mhm.
controls you, but you somehow think that it gives you control. But it doesn't. It's a false sense of control until you become in this vicious cycle, like any addiction, where then you have shame and guilt, and then you binge, purge, starve, or and when I starved, I didn't really have the shame and the guilt, but when I binged and purged,
Right.
overwhelming shame and guilt after you would be done, after you promised yourself you wouldn't, just
Do it
like
again. Right.
ad says I'll never use again, or an alcoholic, I'll never drink again. And then you do, because with food, you have to eat every day, or it's part, you can go without drinking or doing drugs and live, but eventually you can't go without food. And so you're faced with it and these decisions, and it just becomes an all consuming thing.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Yes, this is serious stuff.
It
All
was
right,
serious.
so let's get to the solution. Walk us through. So you recognize that you had a problem because you're binging. You recognize you had a problem because you would go want to throw up a cup of coffee, which really has no calories. Um, so I know if you're an alcoholic, you can go to AA or something and get some 12 steps. But somebody that's, identifying with you right now that's listening that has an eating disorder, what do they do? Go to a psychiatrist? What is the steps um, uh, to solve this problem? So let's talk now about your 21 recovery lessons. We don't obviously need to talk about 21, but give us like the first step that you would go to stop this cycle.
Yes. Well, and through the years, I got a lot of counseling and professional help. And in the book, I truly encourage it for families, for individuals. And the earlier you catch it, and usually it's a family dynamic potentially. Um, People can come from all walks of life, rich, poor, doesn't matter race, creed, color, male, female, it doesn't matter. It can happen. And it's a disease of, and I call that dis-ease, dis-ease
Right.
in your body, in yourself, in your mind that creates it. So I highly encourage. In fact, I talk about in my book that this is not meant to take the place of, I'm not a counselor, although I've certainly been through a lot in my life and I've learned a lot of great things, but to use it in conjunction. So the first step would be to recognize that you have a problem, which you're probably very well aware that you do, especially if you binge and purge. And wanting and being, wanting to get help, I think that's the next thing. And learning about yourself, speaking your truth. What for me, the biggest step in recovery, besides counseling and journaling and things, was to speak my truth. And I think that was the big thing that I had disconnected from myself. What was my truth? And so I remember after I had stopped binging and purging, after that, I still continued to starve myself. But I had stopped binging and purging, and I got free of that. I tell the story, which was actually a miracle. It was I was set free in a moment, but I still had to deal with everything. But it was getting real. So I remember after I had stopped binging and purging, and literally I stopped in one day. That was it. From that day forward, the good Lord set me free, and I tell the story. Although the book isn't about religion or faith, it just tells my story. But I would be amiss if I didn't talk and give credit to the good Lord. Now, not everybody gets a miracle, and I still had to deal with all of the aftermath and all of the stuff that was still in there. And I spent, all of those years doing that, but getting real. And I remember after I had stopped binging and purging, and then maybe I overate, or I just maybe didn't even overeat, but I was sitting with friends and I said, "Can I go throw up?" And that was my truth. That's what I wanted to do. But for the first time in my life, I was honest about it. I spoke it. I said it. Of course, I said it in a joking manner. They knew that I had a problem and they all laughed. And once they realized I was just kidding, I'm like, I'm just kidding. But I want to. I want to. But speaking that truth,
Right.
putting it out there and owning it, took away the power. It took away
Yeah,
the power of
that's good.
hiding and secrecy and so speaking your truth and finding what things inside of yourself that you need to deal with. Because I say that if you have an eating disorder, something is eating you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it can take a really long time to figure out because it's layers. So as a child, and I started out, that was a layer, and then the control with the food, and then this layer went on this layer, went on this layer, and went on this layer until I was so, like I said, walled off and in myself that I kind of just disconnected, and I wasn't connected to who I was, what I felt, what I thought, what I wanted, because it had taken over my entire life. And getting back in touch with those things, and that's part of what the recovery lessons take you through. Um, some lessons people will think, well, what does this have to do with my eating disorder? Because it's about getting you outside of not only figuring out what's eating you, but then also getting you outside of all of that to put your focus on other things, connecting with your food in positive ways, nourishing yourself with food, uh, being gentle with yourself, and believing that you are worthy, that you are, I watched your podcast on you are capable, that you are capable, that, you know, all those things that you talk about of transforming your mind, and that's basically what I think the 21 recovery lessons are. But I talk about creativity, using creativity to deal with some of the things, um, and express your emotions, your feelings, besides just eating them,
Mhm.
pushing them all down. And then the purging, what most people don't understand. You get visions of purging, of, you know, being sick and having an upset stomach and then throwing up. The purging for me was actually very pleasant. And that was the addiction, because it's
I will
like
tell you that I hate throwing up.
you're
Because once you start, you can't stop, and your stomach goes like this. And I will tell you that, I mean, I'm sure it happens to everybody. When you feel like you naturally want to throw up, there's some stuff that comes up in your mouth, and you're saying, "No, I don't want to throw up. I've got to stuff this down," because throwing up is a very unpleasant thing. So when you are taking something unpleasant and making it pleasant, I guess what you're doing is saying, "Okay, well, that food is gone. So that's the pleasant." But the act is, there's nothing pleasant about that. Retching is nothing pleasant about that.
it's different.
Yes.
It was different. And what it was releasing all the emotions. So the big
Mm.
is stuffing everything inside,
Oh, and then the other one is releasing. That's
and
good.
purging,
Yes.
releasing all
Right.
the emotions that basically you're not dealing with, or I didn't deal with. And so that's why the cycle continues, partially because there's all of these things that I, you know, in my life that weren't dealt with. I didn't know how to deal with in a healthy way. And so using all kinds of other things, and that's what the recovery lessons are, in a lot of different ways, and things that I've learned, and coping mechanisms, um, to focus on other things outside of myself, while still learning healthy ways to deal with what's going on inside, and getting really in touch with what is going on inside. And what do I need to say? What do I need to say to myself? Is there something I need to say to somebody else? Writing it down, getting it out, instead of keeping it all in and becoming walled up. It's
Wow.
secrecy. The crux of bulimia and purging is secrecy. It's done in secret.
Right.
It's done in
Wow.
private. You hide from yourself. You hide from others. You hide from the truth. You know, all of those things. And then, you know, the starving is a whole nother ball game. That's a whole nother book.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you just said something amazing just now because, eating disorders is the same as any other kind of addiction. It's whether it's alcohol or whatever, you're trying to self-medicate and you're trying to make yourself feel better. And the bad thing about it is that you're right, your body needs to be nourished. We don't have time to get into what all those years of abuse and not having nutrition in your body did to you, but it's not good. And I'm assuming you still don't like eggs, so
Not very
that's
well,
one thing.
but I eat them
That's,
sometimes.
eat them
It's
now?
my choice now.
Okay, all right. It's your choice
Nobody's
now.
making.
Right, because eggs is a very nutritious thing. It's like the most complete nutrition thing that you can eat is, eggs. So that's amazing. But before I ask you about why you wrote the book, something's been popping into my head, for the entire conversation. And I think I need to lay it on the table here. So eating disorders don't always start from, trauma.
Right.
Sometimes eating disorders will start from, maybe you're in puberty and you're fatter and you want to, like someone is laughing at your butt,
Yep.
boys making fun of you, or models that need to keep their weight, or even you talk about your brother that he is, needs to eat, make weight, or boxers, or any of those people that just need to not eat so that they can gain a certain weight. Do you have a response for that? You probably didn't touch about it in your book because that was not your experience. But what would you say to someone that it's bulimic, for instance, because it started off that they wanted to be 100 pounds or something for a modeling gig? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, dancers,
Yeah.
ice skaters, anybody who, even athletes that are
Yeah.
in limelight all have pressure to be what our idea in society of perfect
Yeah.
is acceptable. And then they put so much pressure upon themselves to to be perfect, to act perfect, to look perfect, or somebody even maybe just one derogatory comment, or actresses in particular. I've heard
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
really get. I heard really negative comments about some of the about Simone Biles on Facebook and her hair. And out of
Mm.
everything else that this amazing,
Right.
beautiful, fabulous young woman came back, overcame, and did, like, the one thing you'd pick on about her is her hair.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't like,
Yeah.
you had so what? It's not a
Yeah.
beauty contest. Even if it was, she's fabulously beautiful. So
Yeah. Yeah.
even at that level of beauty, talent, power, strength, accomplishment, people can find things to pick on or tear apart, of maybe because they're in them of themselves, aren't happy or whatever. But I think you have to just develop this really great sense of capability of yourself, of really solid, like, this is who I am. I like me. I
Yeah.
am good at these things. I am capable. I excel, and just standing on that, and regardless of what other people think and do. But it becomes maybe just an innocent thing that they do, and then it can take over the life. And then it's really, really sad, because then that becomes your life and
Yeah.
all other wonderful things. So I don't know if there's one thing I could say to them other than those around those types of people, help them see other things in themselves
Hmm.
that you admire, that you respect, that you think are good or attractive. And this idea of perfection, if I'm 100 pounds, I mean, that was my thing. I always wanted, I wanted to be 100 pounds. At first it was 110, then 105, and then 100. And then,
Yeah.
where does it
Yeah.
stop?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that's actually what's going on right now. You mentioned Simone Biles, but yeah, that was yeah. I mean, social
Crazy.
media is cruel. I mean, I would look at a post on Instagram, and me personally would think this is just a good thing. It's making me cry. And someone is gonna, not someone, a whole bunch of people are gonna have some really negative comments. I mean, I'm thinking, where do these people come from? But one of the ones that came to my mind when you started talking was Kylie Jenner, because I think everybody's taking this Ozempic now, and she looked terrible. I looked at her and I'm thinking, where is this going to stop? Why does everybody want to be anorexic? Because I know that she is an influencer, and when she becomes looking anorexic, then all the little girls are going to want to be it. So, I mean, I'm not a negative person, so I didn't comment. I didn't say anything on the post, but I looked at it and I thought to myself, is what is she doing? But then she went on social media crying, not at social media, she went in an interview crying that people shouldn't comment on how people look, that it was cruel. And I'm thinking, well, you made that happen for yourself. You know what I mean? But I
Right.
I see exactly what you mean. That um it's very hard when she's saying that you shouldn't criticize somebody from the way they look. Um, but that's a totally different conversation, because I mean, I think if you don't want people to criticize the way you look, then you shouldn't be in social media looking like 90 pounds or whatever she was at the time. But yeah, but all right. So yes, it's not only eating disorders don't only come from um, trauma. It comes from wanting to look, because everybody, even J-Lo, I mean, she was the most beautiful woman, perfect. And then all of a sudden, she starts looking anorexic too, because everybody's discovered this new drug and everybody wants to be 100 pounds. Nobody
Right.
wants to be 120 anymore. 100 pounds is what they feel they should be. And it's
Right.
very unhealthy. So, all right. So we
I
have
think
to throw that in there. Go ahead.
give yourself permission, A, as a woman, to be a woman. I think that's a big thing. I'm a woman, and I have curves, and I
Yes.
that's a good thing. And
Yes.
that, especially as an athlete or a dancer or somebody, the pursuit of perfection, but the reverse of that would be allowing yourself to be powerful and strong and athletic and all the things that you need
Yeah.
to be your best. And that's a little bit different maybe for everybody. But you're right, then the ideal, somebody that everybody admires or respects or follows or whatever, a role model, they become potentially unhealthy. And then that becomes our new
Yeah.
norm. Our new,
Norm.
oh,
Yes.
I
Right.
want to look like her,
Look
and
at her.
thin
Exactly.
enough, and
And
um
that's the problem I had with it, right? Because she is an influencer. She's got like 1 billion people following her. Right. Yes. Okay. So great conversation. So what I know you've got a great story to tell, and it's always great when you have a story. You're also, spiritual. You talked about getting a miracle. And one of the things that I know is God gives you a test so that you can have a testimony. So tell us, why did you write Starving, Binging, Purging, the story of how I recovered from an eating disorder and you can too? What was your motive and what do you want people to walk away with after reading your book?
Thank you for that. I believe I was called to write the book from the good Lord.
Yes. Right.
That I didn't want to write the book, quite frankly. I put off writing the book for several years because of the potential impact it could have on my close family and not wanting to be honest and put things out there that maybe were not that flattering, both for myself and, my family. But I couldn't not write the book. It just kept coming up. You need to write the book. You need to write the book. You need to tell your
Right.
story. You need to help people,
Yes. I
to
agree.
help people because there are suffering people. I feel their pain. So as I wrote the introduction, I literally started weeping. Not just crying, I mean weeping.
Weeping.
And I thought, why am I crying? I've dealt with all of this. I've talked, like, why? And I realized that I wasn't weeping for me.
Mm,
I was weeping for my readers, for the
yeah.
people that are in the crux, in that place, that are, controlled by this and that are living this addiction and don't know how to get out of it. And I know what that feels like, to suffer so much and to want out of it and just not be able to get out of it. And that is the power of the book that I hope. So I tell my story, and then the second part is recovery, because everybody loves drama. Everybody loves to, hear all the gore, whatever. I mean, we do. We're people. We're human. We like the drama.
Yeah.
And so I try to give the drama and the story, the truth, the way that I saw it. But then also to spend a lot of time on recovery and the things that I do still today, every day, every single day, Myrna, I do some of the things in the recovery, things that I've learned to do that help me um, keep myself free of it and keep myself healthy and happy and, outside of myself and hopefully open and a good role model, hopefully, to people everywhere, to say that you can recover. I think giving people hope, because when you're in it, whether it's depression or addiction or an eating disorder or anything, the one thing that you need is hope. Hope. Like if she did it, if she overcame it and it was that bad, I
Yeah.
can. And that burning hope is what I want to pass on, that you can do it. You are capable, that you are loved, you are good enough, you are lovable, all of those things. And then I've spent a lot of years transforming my mind, as you talk about, so that when those negative things come in, I can overcome them. I can talk myself out of them. I can get outside of myself and go for a walk or if I'm exhibiting some unhealthy things, I can question myself and say, what are you doing? Why are you
Right.
doing that? What's bothering you? Let's talk about this, even to myself. Let's write about this. Let's get this out. Let's do whatever we need to do to be happy, healthy, and help other people. Because seeing somebody, very few people ever, I think I read the statistic that only 31% of anorexics recover in the big picture. Most of them suffer if they,
Right.
I mean, the
Yeah.
fatal, it's one of the worst eating disorders. It has the highest fatality.
Yeah.
But being free of it where it doesn't control me, it doesn't mean I don't deal with it, but it means that my mind now knows, oh, you're going to that place. You go there. And then I do things to keep myself and go, okay. And I develop, even as I was writing the recovery lessons, I was like, oh, I need to do that, more of that. I need to do that again. So even as simple, Myrna, fixing yourself something really good to eat that's good for your body, that's good for you, that nourishes you, your heart, your soul. Like food is so much more than just eating and putting it in your mouth. And I think that's part of what people lose touch with. And getting back in touch with that and making friends with food is a lot of what the recovery lessons are about. And sitting at the table, I set myself a table. I put the food in front of me. I make myself sit on a chair and look at my food and experience my food and smell my food and appreciate my food, give thanks for my food, and then believe that I deserve this wonderful meal is so much different than just standing at the counter stuffing stuff in my mouth until I make myself go throw up. That's a whole different picture.
Right.
And
Right.
people can. I mean, I did it. So
Yeah.
that's what I hope.
No, that's pretty good. I love that. I love this conversation, and I love the fact that, yeah, you can give people hope, and addiction controls you. And you know, this podcast is called Transform Your Mind. It works in so many areas of your life because the mind is where everything starts. And one of the great things about the mind or anything that's controlling you is a lot of times it controls you and you're not even aware of it. 99% of people are an autopilot. They don't live consciously. But whenever you become aware of something, it loses its control over you. So what you're talking about here is saying, yes, I'm aware that, food is trying to control me. I'm aware that these triggers are here that's trying to control me. So now that I'm aware of it and I'm looking you straight in the face, then you start to release, it starts to release this hold on you. And I love what you said, where you're sitting at a table and you call it speaking your truth, but it's also talking to the mind, right? When you say, I want to go throw up, but I'm not going to. You can't make me. Because, that's what it does, and listen, our brain, which is where all this control comes from, you've got to work with it. And yeah, so I like the fact that you were this was your mission from God to write this book, to tell your story, to help people. And the recovery lessons are yes, because whenever you've got a disease or a mental illness or anything that you have, you can't get rid of it without doing the work. You have to do the work. It just doesn't go away. So your recovery lessons is doing the work, and it's usually an ongoing thing because once your brain is changed, it's always going to try to get back. You know what I mean? And you've got to make a conscious effort. I remember I had a boyfriend once that was a crack addict, and he tells me that once you take crack, every day you wake up and your brain is asking for it, you got to say no. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing with food. You know what I mean? It's something that's put in front of you every day. So you're being reminded of, hey, should I binge or eat all this pizza? I think I was reading a book the other day, and Rebel Wilson was talking about her eating disorders, and she would eat the whole pizza or two of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
she couldn't stop. So those are, some of the things that people do. So yeah, so Cynthia, this was an excellent conversation. I absolutely enjoyed this interview. I enjoy learning things along with my audience. And I've learned a lot today about eating disorders and how they start. And, without reading your book, I can understand that you've got to work at it every day to keep it at bay. So thank you for being on the show and sharing your story. And you guys, listen, um, if you're overweight at all, you might not be purging or something, but you probably have an eating disorder. So go pick up a copy of Cynthia's book, Starving, Binge, and Purging. It's very easy to remember, but I will have a transcript of my conversation with Cynthia on the show page, which is myhelps.us, and I will link out to her book. So if you've missed something, you can head over to the show page and reread the transcript and definitely get a copy of her book. Now, as we wrap up, Cynthia, any last words? Anything else you want to leave behind for our listening audience?
Yeah, I want to let people know that the paperback, the recovery lessons have space in there to write your answers if you want. Of course, you could get the Kindle, which I have on sale right now at only $2.99. But the paperback, that physical copy, there are lines for you to write in it, like in a workbook style. That's how I did the recovery lessons. Certainly, you could do it with a journal, but I spent a lot of time thinking about the right questions to ask yourself as you go through. Some may be relevant, some not, but I wanted them to know that about the paperback, and that the second half really is kind of like a workbook with questions and a quote. And I explain how I apply it to my own life, how I use it. And then I get some pretty good questions in there for them to work with themselves and to ask themselves, that hopefully will be helpful to them.
Well, I'm sure it will be, because it starts with doing the work. Like I said, it starts by shining a light, because a lot of times you don't know. You went right back to your mother having you sit at the table and eat your eggs and eat your food. I mean, most people don't go all the way back there. They just, recognize that maybe they have an eating disorder when they get to puberty, because when you get to puberty is when your body changes and you're interested in boys, and it's a big thing right then. And if you're overweight or chubby, as you want to call it, then you might start this eating disorder then. But they don't go back to maybe when they were a child, and the reason, or maybe someone said something to them. You talked about the guys talking about your big old butt. That wouldn't happen today, because a big old butt is what everybody wants.
Right? Yeah. I'm like, what? I was trying to get rid of that, and that's what I'm supposed to want? Like, I got this all wrong. Good
Having a
grief.
big old butt is the in thing these days.
I'm
You
telling
know what
you.
I mean? So, but yeah, a lot of people don't go back there. In order for them to go back there, they've got to do the work. You've got to shine a light on it. And awareness is key. Awareness is key. Consciousness is key. So, right. All right, guys, this has been a pleasure for me to bring Cynthia to you today on her book. I mean, we're talking with a niche audience here. But I'm sure a great many of you will identify with her story. And if it does, then you need to do the work to fix yourself. Because like she says, nourishing food is important to a healthy body. And if you don't, give your body nourishing food, sooner or later it's gonna conk out, right? Because it needs nourishment. So thanks again for tuning in. Thank you for Cynthia for being on the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. Tell us your story. Tell us, how this interview helped you. If you're watching on iTunes, we'd love for you to give a rating and a review as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, namaste.
Namaste.